We are recording. I would like to call the meeting of the Loveland Board of Education to order at 6:00 PM and ask Mr. Giuffre for a roll call.
Mr. Doherty?
Here.
Reverend Eilert?
Here.
Dr. Lorenz?
Here.
Dr. Schwetzenau?
Here.
And Mrs. Washburn?
Here. All present. First item would be to adopt the agenda. The agenda is posted on board docs and you should have a paper copy in front of you. Is there a motion to adopt the August 2nd agenda?
So moved.
I heard Mr. Doherty and then Mrs. Washburn. Any questions on the agenda? I don't
Kathy,
believe,
I'm sorry,
yeah,
before
I don't
we
believe
get,
there have been any changes since it was posted.
before we get to that, I've been watching the live feed here and it just picked us up a moment ago. So I don't know if it's worth recapping the attendance on it
Right.
at least. And
Okay, all that we did was call to order 6. We took roll and all 5 board members are present. We are present in the LMS Media Center. And we are recording this meeting and it is being streamed live. So we had a motion from Mr. Doherty and a second from Mrs. Washburn to adopt the agenda. Any questions or comments about the agenda? Seeing none, Mr. Giuffre, can we vote on that?
Mr. Doherty?
yes,
Mrs. Washburn?
Yes.
Reverend Eilert?
yes,
Dr. Lorenz?
Yes.
Dr. Schwetzenau?
yes,
Motion carried. We then have 2 meeting minutes items to attend to. The first one is the June 16th, 2022 board meeting minutes. And so I would ask for a motion to approve those minutes.
so moved.
Mr. Doherty moved. Is there a second? And Dr. Swetchnow seconded. I will make just a brief comment about those minutes. Board members, if they have comments, amendments, suggestions for this June 16th was a meeting that was not recorded. And so we have a bit of a narrative added into the minutes. So it would be good if board members would check that out and make sure that the meeting is represented correctly in those minutes. I will also let you know that I will be abstaining on this vote because I was not at this meeting. So while I have looked at the minutes and proofread them for little picky proofreading details, I was not there, so I can't attest to those minutes. Anybody have any comments, suggestions, questions, additions, amendments? I'm not seeing any.
I will jump in just to,
Yes.
obviously, it was an important conversation for the community to hear. It was very disappointing that this video did not take. We had a technician here that evening. The camera that we normally use, we wanted to make sure nothing was hit inadvertently that would have turned off the recording. It's a 3-step process to turn off the recording. And so the technician assured us that that was not the case. We had our systems administrator was in a different location watching the meeting, who said the red recording button was on. The issue appears to be, for whatever reason, on Zoom's end, it did not get recorded. We emailed Zoom. They came back with an email stating that they don't know what happened as to why it did not record. I can tell you the morning after the meeting, I got with our administrator. It was disappointing, to say the least, that we didn't have the recording or the discussion. And so a disclaimer was put on the video that morning that we got 22 seconds of meeting, and for whatever reason, it stopped recording, as sometimes technology does, I guess. I recreated the presentation. Unfortunately, we don't get the good discussion when I do that. And so we had the recording. We put that out to our community as much as we possibly could through avenues that we have. So if you notice in the back, so that we can eliminate any issues in the future, we've got an old-fashioned camera back there that is ours. And so we're on Zoom, but we're also recording, and we will save that recording. It's going to be a little bit more rudimentary than the other system, but if for whatever reason the other system doesn't record, we'll have that one. So my apologies that it did not record. We did do quite a bit of a deep dive to see what happened, and Probably just one of those glitches that happens, and that's where we are. So just so the board knows.
How many
we are-
hours of conversation did you have with us after this happened?
Say again?
I said, how many hours of conversation did you have after this happened?
Well, having to recreate a presentation in the morning was not what I thought I was going to be doing, but it was important. And we've talked about,
So you recreated your presentation.
Right.
For the meeting.
right. Unfortunately, we couldn't get the good dialogue, but it's just disappointing because it was important, but it's a glitch. It's what technology does sometimes.
Well, the reason I asked the question
Yeah.
is to just kind of make the point that this is a big deal, that we've really worked hard. And this is kind of a message to the community as well. We've worked really hard to kind of expand the concept of transparency here, to improve communications. And those videos have been, one key element of letting the public see the whole conversation that goes on in here. And that was, an important meeting along the way of this levy discussion in particular. So it was of concern to us. And I'm happy as one person that you've taken some extra precautions that won't happen again, regardless of the reasons.
Yeah, it was disappointing. But at the end of the day, you have to make sure you're moving on. And so providing the presentation was the first thought to at least get it out. But apologies that happened.
All right. Thank you. Anything else for those minutes? All right, Mr. Giuffre, can we vote on that?
Mr. Doherty,
Yes.
Dr. Schwechnow,
Yes.
Reverend Eilert,
Yes.
Dr. Lorenz,
Abstain.
Mrs. Washburn.
Yes. Motion carried. The second item is the July 7th special meeting minutes. And so I will move that we approve those minutes.
Second.
And Mr. Doherty will second. That was a special meeting generally for HR items. There were only 3 board members who were able to be in attendance. And as of the end of June, we were no longer able to have board members participate remotely. And so that was the reasoning behind that meeting, and those minutes are there. I believe there's a recording of that meeting, however, for those who were not able to be here. Any questions or comments on those minutes?
I just think it was also a notable meeting with respect to the addition of another school resource officer. Again, thanks to the city for helping us get that in place. I think it represents a good improvement in the level of security that we have for the buildings and for the kids.
I don't know if people outside of Loveland understand just how generous it is. There aren't many cities that are willing to do that. To have 3 school resource officers in a school district our size is very good. So much appreciated.
Okay. Anything else? Mr. Giuffre, can we vote on that?
Dr. Lorenz,
Yes.
Mr. Doherty,
Yes.
Reverend Eilert,
Yes.
Dr. Schwechnow,
I'll abstain.
and Mrs. Washburn.
I'll also abstain since I was not present.
All right, so there are 3 yeses and the motion carries. Now that we have those housekeeping or bookkeeping items out of the way, I will welcome our guests. I welcome those who are listening online. For those who are listening online, I'm not sure what view you get of the meeting, but we have about a dozen folks in our audience this evening besides our administrators who are normally here with us. So we're glad you're all here with us, and I would ask you to rise and join with us in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. The next item on the agenda is hearing of the public. I know we have at least a few folks signed up. Just before we go into that, I just wanted to mention that I made sure that the meeting notice included the fact that there would be hearing of the public. Typically, we do not have hearing of the public when we call special meetings. It seemed that the subject of this meeting was worth having hearing of the public if people wanted to speak. I will also note that at the June 16th meeting, the hearing of the public was moved to a little later in the meeting. I don't know if folks noticed why it was done. I know there was at least one concern that it was moved later and people were not able to stay for hearing of the public. But I believe it was moved later in that meeting to place the hearing of the public closer to the issue, which was to ask the auditor to certify the amounts for a levy. And so it was to give a chance to the folks who were at the meeting to be informed about what they wanted to talk to the board about. So that was the only reason it was moved around.
Kathy, if I could just add to that, part of the reason I think that we did this was that there seemed to be a fair amount of confusion coming out of the earlier meeting about the intent of the levy, what the levy included, and a variety of other related issues. And we just thought there was so much confusion out there that frankly, before people started to address the subject publicly, that we should try to clear the air and have a little more conversation about it was. Unfortunately, I think, that conversation went a good deal longer than any of us expected. And therefore, the hearing of the public ended up getting pushed back, fairly significantly into the evening, which wasn't the intent. It was really trying to make sure that before people made a comment, that they heard a little more factually what was under consideration at that point. So anybody that was pushed back and was offended by that, our apologies. That clearly was not the intent.
But this hearing of the public, is it the normal place for hearing of the public? And Mr. Giuffre, I believe we do have some. And so on the agenda, we note the sort of rules for hearing of the public. You give your name and address. If you have a group affiliation, you mentioned that. Each speaker will have 3 minutes to address any one particular topic or item. And then we generally allow 30 minutes of time to speak. During that time period, nobody may speak twice until all who have signed up to speak or desire to speak had the opportunity. So,
And my phone just died, so I need a timekeeper.
uh-oh.
I'm sorry. I need 3 minutes, please.
You got it, Eileen, since you're sitting next to him.
We have 4 speakers.
Okay. We
And-
should be good. So,
Yep.
Mr. Giuffre, if you will let us know who is first to speak.
Ed Bizick is first. Wait until he
My
starts.
name is Ed Bissick and I live at 112 Fallen Oak, Woodford subdivision. With my wife, Kyla. We have 2 daughters who are now in their late 20s and both of them went through lovely schools, graduated, went to college, undergraduate, graduate, and they're both very successful now in their professional careers. And I give a lot of credit for that to the Loveland schools and the education they got. Very well-rounded, and I think that succeed. Lila and I have always supported the Loveland levies. We've been there for 33 years and felt it important to support the schools until the 2019 levy. And frankly, there were some reasons that I think everybody is kind of beat the death, but I thought the ask was unreasonable. $600 per 100,000 of assessed value is a large number, particularly to people that are retired like us. And second, I thought the message was demeaning, how it was presented. It was like, we know what's best, so just sign off on this. And I think the result, of a 79% rejection, the public spoke. And so the result of that, I think, is fourfold. One is the district missed an opportunity in a strong economy to build on previous successive levies. Secondly, the community lost the trust in the board and the administration. Maybe most important, the campaign drove a wedge in the community. You had neighbors and friends, with competing factions. And unfortunately, we've seen that carry out now in, elections since then. And so all those factors, came together and it carried over to the 2020 operating levels. So, there are 4 distinct, very important results of that. I think people learn from that. And so here we are again at the table needing an infusion of funds. And I, like a lot of folks, was kind of skeptical on where I stood on this. And it became clear to me last week. Mike Broadwater visited our neighborhood and sat down for 3.5 hours with 7 or 8 of us, and 7 of us, and 6 of the 7 were retirees. And we asked, I think, some pretty tough questions. And I thought Mike addressed those very, very professionally. He dealt with them in a factual manner. So it kind of took the emotion out. And some of the questions were asking rather emotional position. But anyway, I thought it was a great meeting. And my takeaway from that meeting is that the schools are being run in a fiscally responsible manner now. That the district continues to excel in academics, and that hasn't changed as a result of the levies recently. And that the levy being proposed is both needed and reasonable. So as a result of that, Lila and I walked out of there, walking down the street, we said, you know, we would support a levy if it's on the November ballot. So anyway, I want to thank everybody on the board. I think you guys have really made great strides in very broken fences. I think you got a long way to go. But I wish you success. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Next, we have Jim Stapleton.
Hey, guys. My name is Jim Stapleton. I'm over on Stockton Drive. That's really encouraging to hear. I appreciate you sharing that. One of the questions I actually addressed to most people when they're going with during the campaign was, how do you build trust? You know, something that's, you know, is something that's a broken system. How do you put the pieces back together? You know, and it's really encouraging to hear somebody that, you know, was against it because of all the things that happened before and now because of the efforts that have put forward. That's really encouraging. Our schools are a major component of our community's quality of life. My family, like many families, moved here because of the schools. It was one of the main decisions of, you know, moving to Loveland. That's one of the best decisions we've ever made. Moving into this awesome community. The teachers and the staff at Loveland positively impacted my son Thomas in so many ways. We could not be more grateful. The truth is, nobody wants to pay taxes. I mean, but this is a commitment that we made when we moved here into this wonderful and amazing community. It's not about me. It's about the kids, about the futures. So I want our kids to have the opportunities that I did when I was a kid. You know, I didn't have to worry about the bus not showing up. I didn't have to worry about my stress of my family out. How I'm going to get to school when they're both working jobs. I didn't have to worry about, you know, my electives being cut, you know, not being able to go to art class or gym, you know. So I want the same thing for my son, obviously, as we all want for our kids. As we know, we get out of our community what we put into it. Strong schools are the heart and soul of this of a strong community. The inadequate funding does real harm to the education process and ultimately the kids themselves and their futures. You know, Loveland's a terrific school district with supportive community. So, I mean, let's keep it that way. That's my view. And, you know, really, it's so much more than just, you know, me and my family. You know, being a voice for the teacher that might have to worry about having their, you know, not coming back next year.
1 minute.
Losing that income for the family, you know, not trying to figure out how to get the kid to school. You know, that has to go, but you also have to work to make sure that that income's coming in. Being a voice for, you know, a bus driver that might not, might have their hours cut or might not, you know, be coming back that next year. You know, I'm gonna be so much more a voice than just my subsection ourselves. You know, I think this is all part of this entire community with better schools and make sure we can find it. So, thank you.
Thank you, Mr.
Thanks.
Stephanie, I think your last name in Scrabble is probably worth 37 points. I'll give it a shot. Loffersweiler? Va bene.
Hi, everybody.
Hey.
My name is Stephanie Loffersweiler, and my family has lived in Loveland at 106 Bridal Lane since 2010. My oldest daughter graduated from Loveland High School last May. Our son is there, and we have another freshman next year and a son just starting kindergarten. When we moved here, we left the Little Miami School District, which hadn't passed an operating level at the time. We started our kids in parochial elementary school largely because of our faith, but always intended to send them on to Loveland High School. Loveland schools at the time were one of the reasons also that we used to raise our family here. Still, when our daughter began at Loveland High School in 2018, sure what to expect because our only experience was with private education. And now, after years being in the school district, we know what we've come to depend upon, and that's that our kids will get what they need here at Loveland. As pleased as we are with Loveland schools, we have felt the impact of their financial struggles, from cutting valued staff to eliminating busing for the high school students, which made our community's already tough traffic problems even worse. Our son, a kindergartner, he's going to start at LCSD in a few weeks. And at first we had enrolled him at the same parochial kindergarten his siblings had attended. But because he skipped preschool, a COVID decision his dad, Matt, and I made, they suggested that we send him, get him up to speed. When I explained this to the staff at LCSD, they assured me that they have any resources my son. But how much longer can parents like me count on what so many have come to expect from Loveland schools? No time is a good time to ask our residents for money, but an operating levy for our schools has not passed in 8 years.
1 minute.
The longest stretch in Loveland's history. The levy in question is conservative in size and builds nothing new. It would fund 5 staff positions, restore the lost busing if we can get drivers, and help maintain current services. Passing it would instantly help the students in our district simply by not taking anything from them. I see all the time how this community supports its schools. The last homecoming parade had probably its biggest crowd ever. Neighbors lined the streets to cheer on our new graduates during the senior moving assembly in May. And when girls basketball coach Darnell Parker fought his cancer, the whole town rallied around him, his family, and his team. Let's put this levy on the ballot, show our kids and educators that kind of support every day in the classroom. Let's help our schools hold on to and keep giving what they have. Thanks.
Thank you. You get the prize. Perfect 3 minutes.
Rebecca Moats. I can say whatever you want. Moetes.
Yes.
My name is Rebecca Moats. I live on 451 Waters Edge Court in Loveland. We have been here since 2015 when we decided to make Loveland our forever home after the military. We have not regretted that decision. I have 3 kids in the school district and 1 preschooler up and coming, so we will be here with their feet in for a long time. We really appreciated all the support from Loveland School Districts. My first grader, when he first came in, had some learning struggles, and right away, like his teacher and the school staff just like jumped on helping him and had him up and going. You know, the school year was over. I'm here to ask for support for operating levy from our community. I think that, you know, we did have some struggles with the last 2 levies, as we all know. But we need to operate the levy to take care of our students and our teachers. Like, we count on the education as a community, we count on it for our students. We're not in a situation where we can kind of bandy around with that. We need money now to support, and it's not going to get easier. People can argue about things like inflation, but if we wait, it's just going to become more expensive. We lost teaching positions with our last operating levy, and I don't want to see that again as a community member, because it's not just about our students and our school, but it's about supporting our community and keeping our community. We've seen also with The community, like you said, a lot of division, which I think is just kind of a trend we've seen, but I think I've also seen our community rally together, like you were saying, when we saw the teachers struggling in the springtime with just everything they'd gone through with the pandemic, we reached out to people and raised, I think it was like $1,600 in 24 hours just for donuts and coffee. And it was like, we love our schools and our teachers. We can do things together. We may not agree on everything, but we can work together.
1 minute.
So I think we need to continue to hold on to those values and avoid like the things like rumors that misrepresent our school districts from perpetuating. So we need to continue to advocate for the school districts. Also traveled the last 2 days. Yeah, it's to represent our school district by supporting the operating levy.
Thank
For
you.
nothing, fine with me. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is that it, Mr. Dufresne?
That is all.
Okay, I will just recap for the board. I know you know we have all received emails concerning the levy. We've received about 24 of them. I will say that the preponderance of them have been folks who have been letting us know the reasons that they don't feel they're able to support a levy. The amount has been mentioned, what it will cost. Inflation has been mentioned. There have been some questions concerning what our cash reserve is, what busing, and I believe that we have some answers to share about that this evening. I will let the board know that we did receive a few emails that were in support of the levy, and we did receive one that requested to be read this evening. As I mentioned before, our policy is that we generally have hearing of the public at our regularly scheduled business meetings. We made an exception this evening and announced it so that folks would know that they could be here. We generally, I think, had added the notion of reading emails or electronic communication based on the fact that we were doing meetings by Zoom and that people really couldn't attend. But our policy does say that the board may allow emails to be read. I will ask my colleagues what they think about that. I have the email ready to read, or I would offer as an alternative what we have done before. We have published the email in the minutes. We have published the body of the email in the minutes so that because we don't have it here to be read in the recording, we would then have it in the minutes if the board would like. So I'll ask my colleagues what you think about that.
There's one that was
Just one that requested. There was a second that requested, but the person was able to be here this evening to speak. So was a person who was not able to be here.
I guess my opinion would be probably to just publish it and not read it, since we didn't make that known to everybody and give everybody that opportunity ahead of time.
My take is I don't like deviating from our standard practices because then it brings up questions, but we've already done that by letting people speak at a meeting that people don't usually speak. So with one letter, I'd be for reading it. And maybe we need to tighten up our expectations of sending letters in to be mailed, to be read, since our raison d'etre for Zoom is fading away.
Nice addition of French there, Dr.
Yeah, I generally think that now that we're in this going towards a post-COVID reality, even though we know it's still present, but in terms of meetings, we're fully back in person. I do believe that our regular policy should be that someone, if they want to speak to the board, should be here to speak to the board. We receive those. We are all, I think, very diligent on reading all of them. Certainly read all of them in advance of this meeting. So the communication is getting to us. I think we can publish them if someone desires that. But most importantly, I think the point of the meeting and this time is for people to speak directly to us.
Yeah.
This is a pro.
It is, in fact, someone who is supporting the levy.
Is there any particular point there that's been articulated?
I don't believe so. I think it is the same, talks about children, teachers, talks about, supporting the levy. So I don't think there's a
So
point that's made.
given that,
Okay. And I would agree, I think, with Dr. Swetchenow and his raison d'etre, that we are working on policy. And we should perhaps look at our public participation policy again to make sure that it says what we believe it should say in our presumably post-COVID world. I'm not sure we're quite there yet, but anyway.
So should we put that on our next work session agenda then?
I actually, when we go into my report, I have a little bit to talk about policy. So,
All right, perfect.
And I would just add that in the past, the most important thing is that whatever emails or letters come to the board, that the entire board member, all the board members have those so that they can see them. That was always the impetus of
Right.
having that.
and this has been made much easier by a button that you can push that the email come to all. And I can assure you that as Reverend Eilert said, board members get all those emails, board members receive all that input. That was my reason for mentioning the number of emails we've received and the subject matter of those emails. So.
Kathy, it's my understanding that group email address board@Loveland Schools just goes to board members.
Sure.
Right. I know past practice has often been to share it with the superintendent. I haven't felt, it hasn't seemed to me like Mike is necessarily seeing all the communications that we're seeing. But I don't know if that's true or not, if you're forwarding any of it.
Generally, what I do is if there's something in an email that comes to the board that pertains either to the work of the superintendent or the work of the treasurer, then I forward that on so that they know what the board is being asked. In general, these particular emails that I'm talking about were directed to the board and were discussions of either support for or questions about the levy and indicating that there was concern about whether the levy would pass or not because of the situation in our economy, because of the cost of the levy.
Just as a matter of process going forward, I think this is a topic that the superintendent should see this community input on. If you're willing to share that, the board's okay with sharing that. I think it's beneficial for Mike to hear what the community is saying as we go through this process.
We do occasionally receive some that are,
Right.
that Mike is included, but I will be happy to forward those if you would like me to do
We
that.
can include in the list, both Mike and myself as secretary of the board, so that we're both apprised and that we can make sure that we have proper recording of those.
Yeah, since it's directed to the board, I might suggest there may be topics that the public is trying to address to us and not to, what's it again? Oh, I had it off before. That might have been what was wrong.
And that will do it.
Somebody's listening, which is good. I keep looking here to make sure the little red light is on for recording. So, if anybody's thinking about that. But my point was going to be simply that not everything necessarily, it could be about you guys. And, there might be some reason.
Those would be the ones we want to see the most.
Yeah, I'm sure you do. And in the interest of good management styles, I would probably share it with you. But I think there might be issues of discretion.
Sure.
So at least on these, because this is a very publicly sensitive topic, and you're out in the community talking to a lot of people, I think it's helpful if you know what people are saying.
Agreed.
If you're okay with that, if the board's okay with that.
Okay. Any other discussion of anything that needs to come before us in the hearing of the public? Then we'll move on to the board president report. And please, as always, board can ask questions or add their own reports to this. I'd like to report to the board first that I attended the Celebration of Life reception for Coach Darnell Parker this past Sunday. The man who was remembered was someone who gave so much of himself for our loved ones. Although he never coached a child or a grandchild of mine own, all that I heard of him was that he was simply a great. I know that he had a smile that could light up any gymnasium. Pictures of him were just incredible. And what I took away from the reception was that we are very fortunate to have had him in our student lives and for those who set up the gymnasium on a Sunday afternoon and did everything to support the family, welcome students in. We're very fortunate to have men and women like that who gave of them time to do that for us. So I just wanted to report that to the board. I do have the pieces of the pictures if you want to see Coach Parker's smile one more time. They're pretty incredible. So I did that. I'd also like to report to the board that work is continuing on district policy as well as administrative guidelines. I had hoped to have a list of policies for rescinding. We're trying to pare down the number of policies we have, and we're getting close. I'd hoped to have them for consideration at this meeting for a first reading, but it will have to be at the next meeting and that's where we are starting. We are starting with those policies that have been deemed by our consultant to be of very low importance and not to be required by law. So we'll be asking the whole board to look at those and decide whether they can be rescinded or not. Finally, I'd like to ask my colleagues to consider 2 future meeting considerations. I'm first asking if you would consider beginning the evaluation of the superintendent earlier than December of this year. In recent years, a particular schedule has not been established. Been interim superintendent. We had a variety of things going on. We have a new superintendent right now. Mr. Broadwater's contract does not require an evaluation at a particular time, but says it must be completed by the end of the year. My thinking is that an evaluation in August or September could also include the approval of annual goals that would then allow him to be working on those goals during this school year rather than waiting till December right through the school year and setting up a new set of goals. So I'd ask you to maybe nod your heads if you would consider adding that to either an August 23rd agenda or to a September agenda. Begin to consider, I believe Mr. Broadwater is ready with his goals, with information that he has about what has been accomplished, particularly with the strategic vision planning. So I think he's ready. I'm just asking for your sort of head nodding if we can consider that in a future soon agenda.
Yeah, I'm certainly good with it. Just as an FYI, I may not be at the late August meeting.
Okay.
So it would have a bias towards September.
Okay. Very good. Everybody okay with trying to fit it into a September
Yes.
meeting?
Where does the treasurer's evaluation fit into that?
I would think that because we have an interim treasurer who doesn't like to be called an interim treasurer necessarily, he's performing the duties of a regular treasurer or a typical treasurer or something. But I would think that as we start that process, Mr. Broadwater, we could make clear what our process would be for treasurer as well. I believe that Mr. Giuffre is also prepared to talk about what has been accomplished in his department and what he hopes to accomplish for as long as we have him here accomplishing those things for us.
And I brought up the question to maybe suggest that doing them on a staggered schedule might actually make more sense to do the treasurer at the end of the calendar year, although your fiscal year is July 1st to June 30th. Maybe so we're not working on
Right.
both of them at the same time, but we have a time that makes sense with their calendars. And I completely agree that doing the superintendent one at the end of a calendar year doesn't make much sense.
Okay.
And my goals are enveloped into the superintendent goals.
Okay, thanks. Thanks for the input. The only other thing that I have is I would ask the board to keep in mind the possibility of, I hate to use the word retreat because it's not something retreat and we are hidden from anything. Any meeting of the board needs to be a public meeting. But I ask if you would consider the notion of even possibly a Saturday morning or a meeting sometime that is totally dedicated to the way the board works. We could include in that the public hearing of the public. We could include how the meetings are working. We could talk about whether we are satisfied with the recording and backup recording and who's doing a backup recording. We've recently had a few questions about minutes. We had a little issue with minutes. So I think there are things that we could talk about as well as we're moving into next year when we'll board member election coming up. So if we could spend some time. I don't know if you would feel like, when you would feel like this might be an appropriate topic, when you would feel that would be appropriate, but I would ask if you would consider adding that to
So you
the
don't,
work schedule.
so you don't start something here. You just said something about board member election.
Right.
And I'm assuming that you're meaning the administrative meeting in January for these two
I'm
slots.
talking about how the board governs, but also talking about, coming up here for board member elections to begin to talk about whether board members are considering re-upping, whether board members
Oh, I
are
understand.
considering
Because there are two terms.
finding folks who are interested in running for the board, if they're not, those kinds of things. I'm not giving a specific agenda. I'm talking about the kinds of things that board members could talk about. Again, public meeting, discussion, not anything that is
And to be clear about it,
retreat worthy,
Yeah.
just asking that it be not in the middle of a business meeting, trying to get a whole bunch of resolutions done.
and to be clear about it, we're not going anywhere. We'd probably come to this room
Right.
and it would still be recorded and
Right.
all of that.
We
right?
might have cookies, but if you have food, people will come. So,
So we could chip in for the cookies.
Would there,
not to give the
would there be milk?
I don't know. Do you want milk with the cookies? What do you have as a beverage? If we do it in November or December, we should probably have hot chocolate. So,
I think it sounds like a great idea.
all right.
I'm not sure about the hot chocolate. I'm good with the meeting.
We can talk about beverages later.
Is there a preferred month? Are we
Pardon?
talking about November, December, October?
We try not to have meetings in December. I think maybe we could talk in October about whether a time in November
Well,
would
Benny.
work or whether
Okay.
maybe early December would work. Since we don't have a December meeting scheduled, there might be some time that we could fit in there. And we could all practice our cookie making skills before we come to the meeting. And
Okay, well, I changed my vote. I'm not coming.
you're not coming. You don't like cookies, but all right. Sorry.
Not into cooking, baking cookies.
Cooking cookies.
Kroger sells lots of good cookies.
I know.
Kevin.
I know.
Opportunity for
We're-
growth.
Sure is, but I'm not going to mix the two.
Okay,
So
very
I
good. Anyway,
put
thanks
this
for your,
in tickler for October
to talk
to
about it.
talk about it. Would that also include appointees to Loveland City?
Oh, thank you. That probably needs to be an agenda item. We need to talk about that separately. Sorry, Mr. Giuffre reminded me that the board needs to be thinking about in January, we appoint
Volunteers.
appointees to things that are outside of board member jobs, to city positions, to the CRC, the variety of things, the recreation board, the planning and zoning.
TIF.
So I think that probably go on a regular agenda, and whenever you feel that's appropriate, we'll get that on agenda. Talk about how those are filled, if there are any that are coming up to be refilled.
That reminds me too, Eileen and I get together and the youth representatives for the student representatives on the board. We didn't do those interviews at the end of the year because we had some that were trickling in. So we'll be doing those this month.
I believe we have 3, if I'm remembering correctly.
So would you be ready to propose on August 23rd, or you think it's more likely to be September? That you
I would bet September just to be sure.
Oh, I
Maybe
was gonna
that'd be great if we could.
Vicious and say yes.
Sure. Okay, great.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right, we won't put you on the agenda till you let us know that you're ready with that. Student reps. Okay, maybe they'll make the cookies for us. All right, I'm stopping with cookies. Can you tell I haven't had dinner this evening? All right, that's all for my report. Anything else that needs to be added? Then we'll go to the superintendent updates.
Thank you. Good evening. Before I get started, I would like to echo Dr. Lorenzo's statement. Coach Darnell Parker, Garth Collier, and I were able to attend the service. It was a wonderful service. Offer our condolences to Darnell's wife, Sam, his two daughters, his mom Nina, and you could tell what an impact he made. And got to know Darnell pretty well as an old basketball coach. After games, I'd tell him you probably should get out of the 2-3 zone. It's not working for you. But he was just, if you knew Darnell, you love Darnell. He'll be missed. He did a lot for our kids. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and get started with the first slide. If you've noticed, we've got those big yellow things out there and we've got a sign and we're trying to find bus drivers. And so part of the emphasis of the sign is we do need drivers. We've got even, I believe, 2 more that have tendered resignations this evening that you'll see. And so we're really, really concerned about the number of bus drivers we have. We're trying to do as much as we possibly can, not only to attract drivers, but also to make sure that we retain the drivers that we have. So what I'm going to review in my first slide, after we move the bus. It's gotten that bad. John, I don't know if you can flip it on your side. That's okay. So the first discussion item, we have sat down, we've looked at what other districts are doing. We work with John Ames, Greg Ossie, Garth Collier to take a look. What are some of the roadblocks that new individuals that want to become drivers have? And a lot of that is the training, the cost of the training, the time of the training. And prior, we had not been paying for that. They would sit into classes, some lengthy classes, and get their CDL before they even got their first paycheck. So what we're looking at is incentives for attracting, but also retaining bus drivers, because as you can imagine, every single district in the area, in the nation, is having the same troubles. So with the new hire, it's going to be a total of $2,000 paid in installments, $1,000 installments throughout the year. We will pay after they've committed to drive and they've driven for a certain amount of time. We want to make sure that they are Loveland employees when they get trained. For training and other requirements, current bus driver, $1,000 longevity payment. That would be $500, I believe, in December, $500 in May, just to say that we appreciate what they do and make sure we're doing everything we can to retain the people that do such a good job with our kids on the bus. On bus instructor stipend, if you're not aware, it's called an OBI trainer. They have to train our bus drivers. It's a lot of time. And prior to this, we had not been paying them. They were doing that on their own accord. This would be a $750 stipend, and the number of hours is commensurate with the $750 stipend. I do have Garth Collier, who is has more in-depth knowledge if the board has any questions on the incentives that we are showing this evening. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask.
You know, if anybody else is doing retention bonuses like this, Mike?
Say again.
Yeah, do you know if any other districts around us are doing retention bonuses like this?
I do not. Garth, did you?
I'm only aware of 2 other districts that are doing it, but that doesn't mean that there aren't. And I think when what you'll find is when a district starts to do something, then there are going to be more that are going to follow, because
Right.
we're all trying for the same folks and trying to retain our own staff. So it's a problem in our area and across the state and the country. And I think when it's a little bit of a snowball effect. The things that we have kind of outlined here, Mike was able to give you kind of a broad overview of the 3 sections of this. I have specific information about why do we come up with the $2,000. And I have in detail here with working with Mr. Ames and Mr. Ossie about, what it takes to acquire your CDL, what is the cost of those tests, what it costs for us to pay folks for the training, all of those things. And I have that for you guys. And we're working with our transportation department and with OPSI group on an MOU to be able to put these things into place to not only attract drivers because we need more, but also to retain our drivers and then our folks that are OBI or on bus instructors to make sure that they're getting compensated for their efforts as well. So,
Do you have a ballpark figure? I know, first of all, do you have a sense of how many bus drivers you would like to attract? So, how many are we talking about with the new hire? incentive, and then number of bus drivers we currently have for this longevity and number of on-bus instructors we have. Do you have a ballpark figure of what this all would cost?
Yeah, so we have roughly right now, we need to have staffed for us to basically run for the beginning of school, roughly about 40 drivers. In addition to that, we hire substitute drivers that they come to the transportation department every morning. We don't rely upon the bus driver saying at 2 a.m, I can't be there, and then somebody else being contacted. Our sub drivers come and almost daily, obviously, they're obviously put to work. There are times when our transportation leader and his assistant are actually driving the routes as well. That's the situation a lot last year. Talking with you about that. So as of right now, because of our resignations, we're looking at the number of substitutes that we have. I believe that we're only slated to have 2, and we typically have 5. So we're already kind of in need. And then, of course, if things happen, so life happens throughout the year. It could be that somebody has to go on medical leave. It could be that somebody has to move away and take care of a parent. There are all kinds of reasons why somebody might be a bus driver for us now, but a couple of months from now, we won't be able to have them. So we are looking at these numbers of decreasing drivers, and we're looking to attract as many as we can. And even with these incentives, guys, this is going to be an uphill battle. But we want to make sure that we're doing everything we can to make sure to retain our folks and to attract folks to bring them on. When we get to the point to where, we have so many that we need to slow down, I wish we could get to that point, but I am not anticipating that.
I see you had a recruiting incentive built in somewhere too.
Yes, there's a recruiting incentive. So if anybody is a district employee and they are the one who recruited the driver, so if we have a driver that recruits somebody else that then is a driver, that they also, and if that driver at least drives with us for 6 months, that they receive a $500 stipend. We're really looking at what other districts are doing and everything that we can do to show these folks that they're important to us and we need them.
So one more thing, going back into recruitment, we have a benefit for people who are being trained. We have a benefit for our current drivers. We have a benefit for our employees who are helping to recruit people. Is there a recruitment bonus for new drivers who already have their license?
Yeah, they're still available for basically the $2,000. If they already have a CDL, for example, that's a piece where they've already kind of completed that step, but we're not deducting anything away from that stipend. So if somebody already comes to us and they're already a driver and they are already trained and have their background check and they have their physical, all these things that add up to that stipend, they're still getting it as well. So if we have somebody who maybe stepped away from another district and they're still looking to drive and they come to us, they're still able, they would still fall under the new hire for $1,000, even though how we arrived at that $2,000, they won't need to participate in all those things.
Great.
But current drivers would get this $1,000, what you're calling longevity payment.
Yes. Basically, our current staff, if they stick with us and they don't resign and step away like so many folks have, after the first semester or halfway through the year, they receive $500 of the stipend. And then if they stick with us for the entire year, it's another $500.
The MOU on this, I would imagine, will not be a permanent fixture.
Correct. We're looking at this for right now with the MOU just being one school year. And then throughout this school year, we're going to be renegotiating with the OPC group anyway. So we feel like that's going to be the time for us to talk about this for future years.
Just to remind the board, and I know you know this, there's a neighboring district now is 3 drivers short of regular routes. And so it's a very competitive market out there, which is why you want to retain the drivers that you have. But as a reminder, we did move to the 3-tier system, which did change some start times. But the thought behind that was when you go to 3 tiers, it requires less regular drivers. And so the fact that we have 40 drivers is a good thing because we need less drivers for the regular routes. all in anticipation. And some of this discussion will be brought up when we do the levy discussion as well. In anticipation, if we're going to return high school busing, what does that look like? And getting a head start on that if we need those drivers.
Mike, just to be clear about
Sure.
this is different from just about everything else that we do in that there's a legal obligation to provide this transportation, right? And there's financial penalties if we fail to provide transportation, correct?
Which transportation?
Busing for 1 through
Oh,
8.
sure. Yeah, right. Which is why there are no neighboring districts without high school busing, but that's why you'll see some districts will go high school busing because there is no requirement. Obviously, with the high school busing, you're not only cutting Loveland City School District, but you're also cutting the parochials that we have.
But my question is, if we
Sure.
fail at providing, I think it's grade 1 through 8, right? Busing,
Probably K through.
or is it K through 8? All right, so if we fail to provide K through 8 busing, there's a state mandate that we do this. And if we fail at some point, we've got financial penalties that accrue to us, correct?
I have never.
Or have accrued to others?
Yeah, that is correct. I've never been a part where.
You've never seen a busing situation like we're in right now either.
No, right. Yeah, good point. Yeah, good point. And there's a lot of discussion at the state level in terms of how do we get rid of some of these roadblocks to making people drivers as well.
Right.
Because the state of Ohio is a little tougher than most states.
Well, I've raised it because I just want to get clear that this is not an optional thing. We cannot fail at this. So, throwing money at it, I don't know, is the end all, right? I suspect that we have more of a problem than what bus drivers earn in attracting bus drivers, but you got to check this box and you've got to see if it makes a difference. Financially, it's going to, I think, be sensible to do this versus the alternatives.
Yeah, I'm always a fan of getting out ahead of things instead of waiting. If you wait for other districts to do it, you're going to see other districts continue to do this.
Going to trigger a lot to do it.
Yeah,
probably.
it will because it's a pretty competitive market out there for bus drivers. So we need to be ahead of it. But yes, it's something we have to do. We have to make sure we do for kids.
And I asked the question about a number, and I don't think I heard a number, but I think what I'm figuring out in my head is there are 40 drivers and there's $1,000 longevity incentive, that's $40,000. So, whatever else is a part of it would be
Correct.
on top of that. If the MOU is worked out, if this is able to be instituted.
Correct.
I just want to say thanks. We'd asked you a couple of months ago to think strategically about what are we going to do to address this and not just keep doing the same thing. You guys have demonstrated that you're trying to do some new things and be.
Thank you. The other discussion item that is there, our EMIS coordinator, that's our data management for all the state data that is required to be reported. Our EMIS coordinator position, we have a resignation, which you'll see this evening. So we're moving it. Is currently an administrative position. We are moving to make that an exempt position. So that will reduce the administrative positions by 1. It's no longer needed to be an administrative position. As the data management has kind of progressed through the years with technology, it's no longer a position that leadership is needed nor extra hours. And so the EMIS coordinator position will now become an exempt position. I know Mr. Collier has the handbook a little bit later. If you recall, earlier in the year for the coordinator of technology, where we added that administrative position, it was in lieu of a teaching position where there was a retirement. So the FTEs stayed the same, but the position designation went from teacher to administrator. Tonight, we're doing the other way, right? We're doing administrator going to exempt, which is an employee in the central office. But Garth, I don't know if you want to add anything with that.
Well, in my report that's coming up later, I'll be giving some more in-depth information on it, but there is basically what I did is kind of did a study of different districts in Southwest Ohio. In board docs in the administrative section, you guys have a summary of that. And it was looking at, are most folks doing, having their EMIS position as an exempt position or an administrative position? What is the pay like? How many days in the contract there are? Making sure that we were A, being competitive, but also B, being fiscally responsible in making this change, and you guys will be able to see that.
So in something like the CUP report, it would show as staff, but not show as admin.
That's correct.
Very good. I don't know if you can pull the next slide up there, Mr. Ames. The next part of the discussion is simply to review the levy information so that the Board of Education can make an informed decision this evening as to whether or not to put the 4.9 mil levy on the ballot. What you see is if the board would agree to put it on the ballot, this would be kind of an infographic we would put out tomorrow morning, along with a short video for me explaining what each bubble represents. We're going to try and get it out as quick as possible if the board does decide to put it on the ballot. And so the information here, we vetted it through quite a few different groups. What is the information that people really, really want to know? First and foremost, the 4.9 is the 4.9 mils. It really is to maintain current educational programs. We have an excellent educational program. We have a lot of high academic achievements. This 4.9 mils is 85% of it is to maintain what we do. Keep the lights on, keep the buses moving. And then the 0.5 mils is for the high school busing. If we can find drivers, when we find drivers, the high school busing would be returned. If we cannot find buses in a time frame that we need and we're not able to do the high school busing, it is $500,000. That's 0.5 mils, $500,000. That will be separated out to where the Board of Education will be able to monitor that. We are not in need of using that until we have high school busing. And so we will make sure that's not touched, and it will need board approval, or we'll need board approval as we move forward with that. I'm sorry?
I will make sure those funds are set aside in cash.
I would suggest, I think we got a little bit of discussion already. About controls.
No, it's well, what you've got, right. Your
controls.
I mean, we've had this discussion, so I don't know if you're in a different frame of mind about it. Or,
no.
I know a number of the board members have been thinking the same thing. But I think, for example, this should be as public as it gets. I think it should be controlled by resolution. The money should essentially be in a separate account of some sort, and accessed only on board action. So it has a chance to see the light of day. It's debated openly by all of us here.
Do you mean if it's accessed for anything other than high school busing? Do you see what I'm saying? If it's set aside for high school busing, it could be used for high school busing. But if it were to not be used next year for high school busing and it's set aside, any change in how it was used would need to be approved by the board.
Right. And I've talked to people who have exactly the same idea.
So we had talked.
Thinking along.
100%. It's what that process looks like is what a treasurer does. But I can tell you that $500,000 is set aside and it's not touched until we have enough drivers to offer high school busing. That is the discussion. How that looks on the treasurer side, so that it is transparent and the board is aware of where it is and that it's there.
Well, and I don't want to belabor the point too much because I know you have a lot to go through, but for me, and I think that what Kevin's alluding to is tying all of our hands to demonstrate the fact that even though we're asking for this money without the knowledge that we'll actually be able to use it for what we're asking it for, that it will not be decided to be used for something else later that's expeditious. And so having some type of formal process to tie our hands or future board members' hands so that it's used for its intended purpose. And if that intended purpose never comes to pass, then the board would have to publicly state, we are no longer using it for this. We are using it for something else instead.
I have enough confidence having worked with you.
Yeah, I agree.
That you're a fiscal conservative. I don't know what the board will look like, 3 or 5 years from now. And depending on the cash situation in the board, I don't want you to be coaxed into spending money on things that we told the community we wouldn't be using this money for. So I'm right there with.
But yeah, I mean, as superintendent, that would be the same goal. And when you promise the community that's what you're going to do, you have to do it. There's going to be.
This is the only one. It's like all of the add-ons
Mhm.
to the way you calculate it here, I think is am I reading this right? 4.2 mils of the 4.9 mils is doing just what we're doing.
Doing what we're doing. Yep. Keeping the lights on. Mhm.
So we got 7 mils between busing.
0.7.
0.7.
I'm sorry, thank you. 0.7 mils between busing and staffing, and I don't know where the contingency. But all those are things that we don't have right now. And I'm of a mind to try to do what Eric suggested for all of these things.
Contingencies within our current funds, correct? That contingency is not right, but it's being funded out of current funds this year.
The
Proposal.
You didn't do the contingency, I don't think you'd be asking for exactly 4.9.
Can I just throw a slight wrench into the works? I understand what you're asking for, and I understand that you're asking for a place where we can see and where the public can see that there's this $500,000 for high school busing. I will say, however, that it is not possible for a Board of Education to constrain future boards of education to anything. They can only be governed by the law. So I'm very happy to be a part of a sort of a resolution, but just letting you know that a different Board of Education can make different decisions at some point.
Board, a subsequent board
Yes,
could theoretically decide to undo what.
yes. I just wanted to make sure they would. Yes, I'm just saying that
That's where
what you're trying to set up, I think, is the ability to see where that $500,000 is and that it doesn't go somewhere else. I understand you're asking for a resolution, and that's fine. If that's what this board wants to do, is say it's governed by a resolution. But to me, it's more important to be able to see it where it is in the budget or where it is in the records.
I think we're agreeing to agree here.
Yeah.
I think we're saying both things. Make it visible, but put a control on it. So it's public debate and authorization from the board to go ahead and access. And I don't have a resolution in mind here, but you could structure one that says if you're going to go ahead with high school busing, you don't have to ask us for approval for high school busing. It's been out in the open, and that's exactly what this money is intended for. But something down the road, I don't think this will be the case, but if you never got drivers hired, this board, you could come to this board and say, I've got 500,000 sitting here. I want to turn it to operating expenses, and the board could publicly make a decision. Well, that'll hold off the need for the next levy down the road by X number of months or whatever.
I think we all have the same goal. What that looks like, it's in the details, but the same goal is the $500,000, the transparency to the community is it's not being spent except for high school busing. If we don't have the drivers, we're not spending that money. That's what we owe the public. That's what we're telling them. That's what we need to do. Oh, I understand 100%. What that looks like would be a further discussion,
Could
but
we
that's the goal.
Could we ask the treasurer to bring us a recommendation of what that could look like?
Perhaps the finance committee could come up with some options to put together a recommendation for the
Finance committee, me and Eric.
and me and the superintendent.
All I want is a low page on the budget that has 500,000 for
So,
buses. and-
Just to be specific here, the contingency is a budgetary line item. That budgetary line item stands by itself. Everybody can watch it on the forecast. They can watch it through the whole cash flow through the entire year. That takes care of itself. That requires, because the superintendent and I are saying, requires board action, if we're going to use that money. So that's very, very clear. $500,000 is cash per year, which doesn't happen until after the levy passes, which is half a year.
But isn't the contingency the same as that? You don't,
No, it's not.
are you saying that you've got $1.6 million
That-
unspent that you would
Contingency.
put into a contingency fund right now?
Contingency is a budgetary line item for the current budget year that will be put in place with the permanent appropriations for this year. The $500,000 for buses is contingent upon the levy pass. And those levy monies would only be collected for half a year. So in 2023, that would be $250,000. That's cash. And when we spend it, we would be spending it for salaries and benefits for bus drivers. So if we only get 5 bus drivers, it would be a different number than if we had 10 bus drivers, or what we're going to need with parochial and everything else is probably 13, 14. We don't know. But whatever that is, that's cash. So that would be something that we would talk about in the finance committee about how do we want to do that? Do we want to put it in a separate fund?
Yeah.
Do we want to have it someplace where we all know what that is and we can identify it? Because when we spend it logistically, different spend than contingency. Contingency goes into the line item for which it was intended. This does as well. But if we don't spend it in the first year because we can't find drivers, then it would accumulate. So it would be accumulative. So I think that's a good discussion for us. I will come up with some options to share with you to bring back to the full.
I'm going to stop this for tonight, but we're going to continue to talk about this, I think, within the committee. I always used to tell people all the money, regardless of where we're spending it, is green. So whether it's a budgetary line item or cash, as you describe it with busing, to me, it's real money.
Sorry.
All right. So we're going to agree to disagree for tonight, and we can pick it up so we don't bore everybody with it.
This sounds like a great conversation for the finance.
Yeah. So we won't. But be aware, I have a concern about that one. I have a concern.
We can nail it to the floor.
Yeah, I have a concern about the head count as well, that it be controlled. And I think we, in fact, have a mechanism for doing that. But I think being explicit about it is a good idea. The mechanism is that all new positions are approved by the board regularly.
Yep.
So we'll have an opportunity to say, where is this money coming from? If you decided with the levy in the rearview mirror to add these positions, you'd have to come to us anyway.
Right.
And part of what my point is that we already have in place processes that facilitate some of this. What we're looking for are processes that don't necessarily exist because we're trying to definitively identify.
Right. So all this obviously is that we're still on the journey of building trust and all of that. And it's not over. And I think something realm that we're talking about would be perhaps helpful.
There is not one discussion I have with any community member that doesn't mention we need to build trust. As a superintendent of Loveland City School District, to promise our community something and do something different is not what our community is going to allow us to do. We all have the same goal here. What that process looks like, I think, is where we're getting a little.
Okay.
But I think you've offered some suggestions on how to do that. The rest of it is the 0.2 mils we have for staffing needs. Those staffing needs are certified staffing needs. We have written down in the assumptions 2 FTE the first year, 2 the second year, 1 the next year. And I'm going to say it loudly if needed. That is so that if it is determined that we have already cut over 50 positions, if we say after the levy passes and we will take a year with action plans and we hear that we need a gifted position. That was there before. We feel it's important now, we being the district in the community, it allows us to take a look at that. It's also important to know 5 FTEs is 1% of our staff. It's 1% of our staff. When we cut a few years ago, there were approximately 50 positions eliminated, which was 10%. And I know enrollment has gone down through COVID. And so what has happened, it's actually worked out pretty well. Our class sizes are appropriate, because the enrollment has gone down and the FTEs have gone down. So when people ask about enrollment, that adjustment has really kind of been made through the staffing reductions currently. So again, just to recap, we have 4.9 mils. 4.2 is to keep the lights on, doing what we're doing. The 0.5 mils is going to be for high school busing when we find drivers. And again, we will set that money aside in some fashion so that we are being able to answer to our community. And then the staffing needs is the 5 FTEs, which is 0.2 mils. So therefore, the staffing is 5%, busing is 10%, and the 4.2, which is just maintaining, is 85%. Big question I get is how much is it going to cost a homeowner? And 4.9 mil levy would cost about $14 per month. I think it's $14.29 per $100,000 in home value. So you can kind of extrapolate out. If it's $200,000, it's $28. If it's $300,000, that's $42 if per month. If you want to know how much per year, then you multiply by 12. So it's $14 per month is generally the value that you're going to see districts put out, because then you can kind of go through and figure out what it's going to do for your home value. It has been 8 years since Loveland City School District has passed a levy. That was 2014. The 12, Loveland City School District is operating on the lowest effective tax rate in 12 years. The tax rate is another way to say millage, because sometimes millage people don't like that term. It's a little confusing, but the tax rate is the lowest it's been in 12 years. Number one, there is no district in Hamilton County that has a better performance index while spending less money. And we put that return of investment on some of our newsletters. We'll get that out on the FAQ should the board proceed with putting this on the ballot. So this is to come out tomorrow if it's on the ballot. So we're at least getting some quick information out there. 40, this levy is smaller than almost all the school levies approved by Loveland voters in the last 40 years. There have been 8 operating levies approved over the last 40 years. This is lower than 6 of them. So the word that I try and use as much as possible is reasonable. We know that our community has spoken. We know our community wants to make sure that we are asking for reasonable funds to maintain the excellence that we have going. And we are an excellent school district. When you look at our academic scores that have come out, and we'll report them out next month, our academic scores are very, very good. Our AP program, very, very good. And so I like to say you get a pretty good bang for your buck. When you look at the expenditure per pupil and the performance index, we are pretty good.
Mike, before you move on, I sorry to nitpick.
Sure.
But I want us to be accurate about this. And the voted millage history that I look at doesn't say exactly that.
We're at 36.83.
No, the voted millage, not the effective. This last point about 40. We had a 5.6, we had a 7, a 5.6, a 6.50, and a 6.50. It's 5. Not.
Are you going back to 1976?
I'm going back to 1983, if I wanted to, but the fact is that since 83, we've had a 4.9, a 6.5, a 6.5, a 5.6, a 7.0, a 3.5, a 3.5, and a 5.6. So it's not the majority of the levies that have been voted on in the last 40 years. It's not quite.
And I don't have those numbers in front of me. I heard you say 2 numbers that were smaller than 4.9. And
Right, 3.5.
Numbers that were higher. Or one was equivalent.
Okay. All right, I got it. I'm wrong.
Okay.
You're right. I got it. I was looking at it the wrong way.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Next page, if you take a look at it.
Sorry, Mike, I'm going to make you stop too.
Okay.
And I know that I'm jumping ahead and this isn't part of the slide, but I've heard this complaint, or I've read this complaint, or people have told me this complaint several times, and it makes no sense. And so I've hit this slide a couple of times. John, can you give us 12 out of 16? Is that possible? 12 out of 16 on the slide deck.
It's the one with the graph, the performance in. Keep going. Keep going.
And Mike, I know you're not planning to go through all of these tonight, or I believe that's.
Go ahead, John.
So I wanted to call this out. Keep going, John. There. There's back one. Yep. There. I've heard several times Loveland schools are not providing the education that our children need, that their excellence is nowhere close to the amount of money that we're spending on the school district. And this graph, which is we've talked about before and is freely available, just shows that to be completely wrong. The performance is higher and the cost is lower. The performance is significantly higher and the cost is significantly lower across the board. So again, I've called that out before, and I hated to interrupt you to call it out again. But one of the things that I hear is that Loveland schools are not performing well, and why should we pay this much money? This graph shows that just to be wrong.
Yeah, I think that's one that I would argue all day. When I look at our performance, and if just to the graph, the vertical axis is your average expenditure per pupil in Hamilton County. We are less than the average in Hamilton County, the average expenditure per pupil. The horizontal axis, your x-axis, is your performance index average. As you can see, we got the orange arrow. We are extremely high. So the quadrant that you would want to be in is the left quadrant, right? That's your bang for your buck. That's where you're above PI average, but you're below in the expenditure per pupil. And so if you look at the reason we make the number one statement there is we are farther to the left, but just as high. If you look at Wyoming and Forest Hills, you have Madeira, you have Indian Hills. That right side quadrant is going to be your Indian Hills, your Wyoming, Madeira, Marymount. So yes, not to belabor the point, but I think we have plenty of information that would refute what that is. What's your
The
statement?
case is actually stronger than you just made. It's not just Hamilton County. When it comes to money, we're in the lower half of expenditures per student in the state.
Yes.
And that's versus, a data set of 600 districts. So economically, it doesn't feel like this to the public because they're paying a heck of a tax bill.
Right.
I'll talk more about it later, but that's what it feels like. The reality is what Eric is saying and what you're saying. Economically, this is very middle of the road when it comes to expenses spent on running the school district. And then you get this nice bonus of being able to deliver academic results that are in, the top 10% or so.
Right.
So back to slide 4, John.
No problem. I appreciate you pointing that out. Slide 4.
Loveland City School District frequently asked questions.
That's it. All right. So basically, this would be the other side of the infographic that we would like to provide, again, some quick information. Really, the utilization of the 4.9 mil operating levy funds, that graphic is saying the same thing that was said on the front, just a different way and in a graphic fashion, that you can see the majority of the funds, 85% of the funds, are to maintain our current educational programming. And again, the previous slide we just saw, our educational programming, we are excellent. I would put us as one of the best public school districts in the state of Ohio. And I've seen a few. So we are an excellent school district. When you look at the orange there, it's 10%, restore high school busing. When necessary drivers are employed, again, and that goes back to the previous conversation. And then the 5% is 5 additional staff members if needed due to enrollment and or programming as we move forward. So the lower left, why is a levy needed? I think it's important. And this is the part that I think when I went through my interview at Loveland, I made the comment because it was pretty easy to see looking at our 5-year forecast where we're headed. And there is not a single day that I enjoy asking a community to pass a levy. It's not something I want to do as a superintendent. It is a heavy burden to do that. I got into this to educate kids and to do what's best for kids. As the superintendent, I would not be doing my job if I didn't tell this community that our educational programming is going to be greatly affected without this additional revenue. The point that this bubble is going to make, and I don't know if all the board is aware of this, the state of Ohio is the only state without any inflationary adjustment for education funding. We are the only state in the United States that does not provide an inflationary adjustment for our revenue. And there are different states that use an income tax and different states that have automatic assessment. Ohio has said they want the voters to be able to determine what they want their school district to look like. And that's fine. It's just important that to educate voters knowing that is why additional revenue is needed. It's not because there's a mismanagement of money. I can, and I will, I'll go through everything we've done this year to manage and to do what we can possibly do in a fiscally conservative manner. So therefore, in order to maintain local control of our education, we must either ask our community for additional funding or make substantial cuts. And that's just simple math, right? If you either need more revenue or you're going to have to make cuts. And so I think it's important as a superintendent to allow our community to tell me, which is it that you want? My concern is we've already made very deep educational cuts, and the next cuts are in the classroom. And I'll talk about that a little bit later. The next is, before making cuts, what I just said, and eliminating programs, we feel it's important to give the voters an opportunity to approve additional funding. The lower right is where it says, how much will the levy cost me? Again, the home value is $14, and if the home value is $100,000, cost per month is $14.29. Then the rest of the chart gives you the 200,000 and the 300,000. And again, just multiply by 12 to figure out how much additional that's going to be per month. So with that page, I will stop and see if there are any questions that the board may have before I proceed.
I've interrupted enough.
I do want to come back to this 1.5 million at some point, not publicly here, but I'm not sure the public's going to understand where the 1.5 shows up in all of this. So just have that in the back of your mind. We'll talk about it in committee and try to see if something needs.
Yeah, the contingency fund in my mind, Kevin, is such that it's not what I'm using in a general fund. And so when I say what's being used, but I understand the question.
Still green.
Okay, looking at the next page, what has Loveland City School District done to manage its budget each year? Since I've been here, the hiring practice, Mr. Collier, given the direction that when we go to hire, we want to look at hiring 0, 1, or 2 years. The nice thing about Loveland's experienced teachers, the nice thing about Loveland City School Districts is we're an excellent school district. And so we get excellent candidates. And so when you look at the practice in hiring 0, 1, or 2 years, and there's going to be some positions you have to give a little bit more depending on the demand. But we have saved over $600,000 on salaries by when an experienced veteran teacher retires, we're bringing in, whether it be a student right out of college or 0, 1, or 2 years, and that hiring practice will be maintained. Maintaining FTE counts before this year. I'm not sure that was happening, but the FTE counts, we have a chart. We've presented on that. Only additional FTE that was done out of the general fund this year is a special education requirement for a paraprofessional. That is a legal requirement that we do not have any choice in the matter, that we have to make sure that we provide that. So again, I'm going to remind the cuts that have been made. There have been approximately 50 staff positions eliminated already. And that's been handled. The enrollment did go down, so we're doing okay with class size. 17 of those positions, 17 were teachers, okay? And so you can tell about 33 positions were not classroom teachers. It means our support staff was touched the most, which means if there's another round of cuts, it's going to be classroom teachers and administrators. And so that is the concern. It's not a threat. It's a reality of where we are in the district.
I interrupt.
Sure.
Now it's my turn. Just that it said to you, one of the concerns, we read those emails and people that have concerns, things that comes up is enrollment.
Mhm.
She said as enrollment has gone down, it's one of the ways we've been able to lower our overall FTE count. Are there any indications that our enrollment's going to continue to decline in these next years in a significant degree? I've not seen anything that indicates that. Certainly our kindergarten numbers this year look like they're on par with where they've been in the past. Is there anything to indicate that we would be able to harvest, significant savings from a reduced enrollment in the next year?
Yeah, the quick response. And I had mentioned that due to COVID, 2.9%, every public school district had seen an average drop in enrollment about 2.9%. That doesn't explain everything that's happening, but it's a little bit. When I look at, I can look at a stat where it gives live births, predicts live births. I don't see a dramatic drop. I don't see a dramatic increase. So that's why when we say maintain, we would like to see maintaining the excellence that we have. I can tell you that our kindergarten program is up. I think we're up maybe 20, 25 kiddos compared to. Okay, yeah. So plus minus 20. So it looks as though it's going to increase. It'll be interesting to see where the enrollment goes. What I have experienced in a similar district, and I would call us a suburban district where it is a desirable area that families would move into. You will see families move into. The progression is the students progress through, graduate. You've got an older family. They start to sell. And so you start to see the enrollment going down. And then as these houses are purchased, the enrollment starts going back up. And so when you look at a Loveland City School District, do I think we'll see a dramatic decrease? No. Do I think we'll see a dramatic increase? No. The only data I've got, and Kevin may have some, but the only data I've got, the live births, it looks like it's pretty well leveled off in regards to that. So.
Thank you.
So if you look at Miami University has a population study center, and they do projections by age groups. And they have historical data as well. This stuff is kind of hard to come by, but they've done it. The message in it that I see for the last 5 years and going forward, maybe 10 more years, is low single-digit declines in, I'll say, school-age populations across the Tri-County area that we pull from. So to Mike's point, what's happening with population doesn't seem to be a material impact on us. Something else was reasonably material. And I just back of the envelope a little bit, Mike, but took the 17 teacher headcount, multiply it times an average class size of maybe 23.
Okay.
So that's just around 400 kind of classroom student equivalents that we have reduced since, what would it be, 2020? And if you look at headcount from the state as reported to the state, we've been down for the last several years, but not down nearly that much. So I think, for example, if I go back to 2019, at the state, they're calling it 4,200. And we dropped to 4,190. We dropped to 4,000. We dropped to 3,900. So we've got a few hundred, 200 and change kind of difference, but we've reduced staffing actually proportionately a little more than that. So if this does continue to decline, and nobody really knows, right?
Right.
What's going to happen? If it does continue to decline, we've kind of been able to manage class size reasonably well through all of this. I can share this with you if you want, but I did.
Kevin, I can sum it up. You described it perfectly, and Mike did as well. A frequent email that we see is, why are you asking for more money? Loveland School District is shrinking. Well, there's roughly 300 and so less students than there was several years ago. We have 17 fewer teachers teaching roughly 300 students less. The district has been proportional in its response in reducing staff in conjunction with the loss of students overall and the head count of the district. That doesn't mean that costs don't continue to increase. And again, to some degree, I worry that people just get messages and they just stick with them. But why do you need to spend more money when you have fewer students? Well, we've already spent less money because we've had fewer students.
Right.
That's what these numbers show us.
100%.
And I just, again, I don't know how many times you need to say it to make sure that people hear it.
That's the hard work of right sizing the district to the student population that it serves. People don't necessarily see this or realize it, but it's what's been going on here for the last couple of years.
Well, yeah, and I think we said this in a prior board meeting, the difficult part of my job is I want academic excellence. That's why I'm in this business, right? But I also need to be fiscally conservative, and what's that happy medium? And so there were programs that have been eliminated that parents would say, wow, when are those coming back? And so you're balancing all of that, yet making sure that you're doing the right things fiscally. I will tell you the 5 FTEs, I would challenge you to look at marketing material for any other district that's done a levy and show me where they put a limit on the number of FTEs that they're going to do the next 3 years. That's a pretty big challenge, but it's one that I feel the community, they're going to make sure that they keep us in check. And it really is based on enrollment. I don't see enrollment going way up or way down. But I also know, and I hope the board knows by now, that we brought the term FTE in, which staff, that's 86% of my budget. And so that's what I'm looking at. And I want to make sure I provide the best programming for the best bang for my buck. And that's where Garth and I talk every day about where are we with the staffing. And it goes up and down with busing and paraprofessionals. But at the end of the day, it's important. And that's where the bulk of the money is in our budget. And so it's important that the 5 FTEs in the levy literature holds our feet to the fire, right? That means we're not going out and adding where we I hate to use willy-nilly, but adding where we have to make sure that it's necessary and it's going to affect the academic student. So.
Well, and again, to your point, I think that this goes back to rebuilding trust, demonstrating transparency, demonstrating fiscal responsibility. I've never seen a school district say, we are committing to keep our FTEs to a minimum growth level. And it goes back to the argument of, well, you're asking for more money, you're just spending it willy-nilly, which just isn't happening.
Yep. Part C here. The contract for our staff, the Board of Education and the administrators and our 2 associations worked diligently such that the contract for all the staff, the teachers, the classified staff, the administrators in 2022, 2023 took a 0% increase. They recognized what the community was saying, making sure that we're fiscally sound and making sure that as we look at salaries, we want to be competitive. We don't want to be number 1. We don't want to be number 22. We want to be competitive in that market. And those contracts, our associations and our administrators did a very, very nice job of helping us with that. The ESSER funds,
Mike, so you don't get caught on this one.
Sure.
It's a zero base, right?
Correct. Mm-hmm.
So people that graduated experience got increases for their growth and experience. So there was growth in wages, right? But the base, which is kind of a fixture of these contracts, is where the zeros were.
Correct. Thank you. The ESSER funds were spent strategically. We had approximately $5.2 million in ESSER funds. You would see some districts giving different employees bonuses, using them for different items that were add-ons. What Loveland City School District did was to use it strategically and help out with the general fund. And so if you look at the general fund, the expenditures may seem low in one year simply because the ESSER funds were used so that we could save the general fund. Alternative funding sources, tuition for full-day kindergarten. And the tuition for full-day kindergarten comes very, very close to covering those expenses. Grants and business partnerships is a part of our strategic vision that we will take a look at. Our pay to participate is the highest in the county for our families, and we do not reward or help families with more than one athlete. They're paying for every single sport for every single child, every single season. And so our families with the pay to participate are shouldering that cost. The final talking points I have, which is the next slide there. I'm going to try to explain that graphic, but a 4.9 mil 3-year levy eliminates deficit spending. For me, that's the number one deal. I want to eliminate deficit spending. It's just like your household budget. If you're spending more than you're taking in, you're either going to need a little more revenue or you're going to have to do some cutting. And where we're at before we do the cutting, the reasonable ask for the revenue allows us to maintain what we're doing right now. Along with number two there, well, let me finish one. A 4.9 mil 3-year levy eliminates deficit spending and allows the district to continue the excellent education service the Loveland community appreciates. The district has not had a levy passed for 8 years. And again, 8 years is a big deal. That's a long time without additional revenues. If you go 8 years without additional revenues, what that means is you're cutting expenditures, which means you're cutting approximately 50 staff members, and the additional revenue would be from the ESSER funds. Along with the cut was the high school busing and some other things. So it will allow for restoration of high school busing if drivers are available. It allows for 5 FT associated with the classroom and the strategic vision. And again, I will say if needed, if we get to the end of the year, levy is passed, we feel that we don't need to add the FTEs. We're not here simply to use those. It would be great to push those down, but we want to make sure we're providing the best academic program for our kids. 5 FTEs is 1% of our staff, and that will be spread out over 3 years. And spreading it out over 3 years is a savings also. When you do the first year versus 5 the first year, you're saving 3 FTEs and then you're saving more the next year. It just kind of dominoes. House Bill 920, just to re-echo what we said, it does not allow for inflationary adjustments over time. And that is where we said the state of Ohio is the only state in the union that does not allow for inflationary adjustments. We work very hard. I just mentioned everything we do to manage costs and expenditures. This levy is not about wants, it's about needs. It's about maintaining the excellence we have, the high school busing, and making sure our class sizes are appropriate. If the action is delayed, the need will be greater. And the explanation I would give, and this gets into state funding, but if the levy passes in November of 22, the district would realize those funds the following year in 2023. If you wait until May or November of 2023, it doesn't really matter if it's May or November, you're not receiving those new funds until January of 24. That's the way the state funding model works. And therefore, with the $3.6 million deficit spend next year, if we do not do it now, Mr. Giuffre likes to use the analogy, it's like using your credit card. If you're using your credit card to pay your bills, it takes a lot more time to get out of there. And so it just makes sense to ask right now so when we receive, we can get out of deficit spending. The chart that I have up there, the board can tell me if this makes sense or not, but to me, it makes sense. When you look at the horizontal axis, it's the year 2014 and the year 2022. The year 2014 is because that's the last time we passed a levy. That levy is the orange, which is 5.6 mils in 2014. It raised $421 in additional revenue, that 5.6 mils, for a house that was valued at $215,000. So the first data set, 5.6 mils was passed in 2014. A $215,000 house raised $421. When you move along to the year 2022, you can see that that house, that same house is appreciated to $258,000, which means due to House Bill 920, we are not seeing additional revenue, which means the effective millage is going to have to drop. So that 5.6 mils now becomes 4.6665 mils because our revenues stay the same, which is $421 for the 5.6 mil levy that was passed in 2014. To me, it's a graphic that shows kind of the enrollment piece that you had said, whether enrollment is going down and we've reduced FTEs, revenues are staying the same. We still have light bills. We still have buses to buy. We still have diesel fuel. And so the graphic is simply to show that we do not get an increase in revenue due to House Bill 920. So with that, I'm going to stop. I tried to provide as much information as you. I do have other slides. If you went through and you want to look at those, we can do that, or any other questions you may have.
Might be useful, Mike, on this last slide to think about inflationary cost growth over that. Most of that is actually salaries.
It would be, yes.
Well, and we could talk about school financing forever. I think the bottom line, I think this is a great presentation. I think that the way that you lay it out is very understandable to people. There's a lot of facts here that just go to show how hard the district has worked at trying to keep costs down and what the district has done in order to keep costs down, especially in light of the failed levy, which was a shock, I think, to the community. I personally don't want to see the same divisiveness again. And I am very supportive of anything that we can do in order to make sure that neighbors don't have to turn on neighbors. One of my biggest fears is that people say we're in a very inflationary environment right now, and this is a bad time to ask for money. The simple truth of it is it's an inflationary environment for the school district. It's been an inflationary environment since 2014, which we've been slowly sinking underwater because we've had no way to keep up with those costs. And the idea that putting this off to the future will make things better is far from certain. Inflationary environments very rarely turn into deflationary environments.
Right.
So I think it's just keep messaging the strength that we have as a district, keep messaging the reasonableness of this ask, keep messaging the fact that this is the longest that we've gone as a district without a school levy. I think you did a great job putting it together.
Thank you. I would echo Mr. Bissig had mentioned that we had gone and talked to a group, and there were some tough questions, but boy, it was nice because it was very respectful. At the end of the night, if we disagree, that's okay. That's okay. And I think bringing a community together is very, very important. I was in downtown Loveland Friday night with my wife. It's awesome. This is a great community, and we need to let this community tell us what they want these schools to look like. I would not be doing my job if I didn't say we're going to have to cut some programs if we don't get revenue. That's not me making a threat. That's just where we are. There is no great time. I think when we were talking the other evening, Eric, I was in the district in August of 2001. And the timing of this is awkward. You always get it certified in June and then vote in August to get on the ballot, and it's over the summer. But in August of 2001, we thought we had a pretty good shot, and then 9/11 happened, and it didn't pass. And so I've seen many, many times where when the economy's good, it doesn't work, and when the economy's bad, I'm not unempathetic to what our families are going through, but I also think it's my responsibility to make this as reasonable as possible and let our community know where we're going in regards to our education programs.
Anything else for Mr. Broadwater? Then we can move on into our agenda, in which the first item is a resolution to proceed to levy an additional tax for current expenditures and direct the treasurer to certify a copy of the resolution with the Board of Election accordingly. Is there a motion?
I'll second.
I heard Reverend Eilert and then Dr. Swetchnall. And so we have a motion. Is there additional discussion on the part of the board concerning this resolution? Mrs. Washburn?
I prepared something. Would this be a good time to share it?
Mhm.
Okay. So as we know, the time's nearing when we must decide on an operating levy. I want everybody out there to know that I don't take this decision lightly. So we know from the past that we must do right for the taxpayers and those that elected us to these positions to cultivate our most important assets, our children. Our children represent the future of our community, our state, our country, and our world. Over the past several months, the district has engaged all members of the community in identifying what it felt were the most important tenets of education in Loveland. All community members were welcome to be part of the collaboration. The process of coming together is what I love most about our community. We really do have great people here. When looking at the district finances, we see that there's a need for further discussion. When looking at ESSER and coronavirus relief funds, the district has or will receive $5,003,417.42. So if we took that amount in context of what our general fund expenditures were in fiscal year 2022, $51,087,171, that's 9%. Of the ESSER monies we have or will receive, we were required to use a substantial portion on learning loss. When looking at enrollment, Loveland has reduced 3% more staff since 2008 than student enrollment decline. The state of Ohio also sees a decline of an average of 3% of students per year. It's important to note that this decline is not always proportional to one grade level. And as our administrators make decisions about class size, a modestly declining enrollment does not always mean declining fixed costs. In terms of efficiency, the district scores higher than local school districts in the performance index, while spending less than those same school districts. When looking at the actuals to the forecast, Mr. Giuffre was 99.6% accurate with revenues and 99.9% on expenditures. This shows the thought and planning that goes into district finances. It's not something that any of us take lightly. Finally, as we look at the state of our world today, we understand the forces of inflation and the impact it has on our country, our state, and our community. The district is not immune to inflation. Whether it's sourcing supplies, food, buses, or fuel, the district continues to find strategic ways to meet the needs of students. The reality is that the cost of items has continued to rise. These are the realities that we have to take into account when making these decisions. And we ask for your grace as we navigate these difficult waters to do what we feel is best for the students of Loveland City Schools.
Thank you, Eileen. Other comments, statements?
I wrote something as well, so happy to share that now. I will be voting tonight to place this school levy on the ballot in November. Like many others, I wish the economic situation in our country was different when it comes to the impact on local families, but I believe that our superintendent and treasurer have made clear why this is the time to put this levy on the ballot. I think that given current economic challenges, this levy is reasonable and reflects the balance that we're trying to achieve as a district between being fiscally responsible while also prioritizing excellence in education. I believe in the vision developed by the community for the district and its potential to grow the positive impact we can have on the students of our district. I also believe that while I have concerns about our economy, I have even greater concerns for our children. We're raising children that are dealing with higher degrees of anxiety and complexity in their world. We have to dig into the work of raising up more resilient and adaptive youth to meet the challenges they will face. I just spent a week with 36 students, many of whom were Loveland students. They're amazing kids, and among them were some of the strongest leaders among the graduates from this past year. But when you find a quiet moment for a one-on-one conversation, even our strongest leaders will tell you they struggle with what is next for them. So we have to keep investing in all of our youth to set them up to be our next leaders and innovators, and this simply takes resources. We have a plan that will expand our ability to invest in our children through creative engagement with our community, but its success relies upon our ability to maintain the excellent things that are already happening in our schools. This levy does not add a lot of new things. It simply allows us to ensure that we can continue and enhance the great things that are already happening in our schools. And as Mr. Broadwater showed us tonight, we already provide these services in a cost-effective way that exceeds what is happening in all of our neighboring districts. I believe this levy, the first in 8 years, is important to the vitality of our district and our stewardship as a community of the next generation entrusted. I earnestly hope that the community will listen to our rationale over the coming months and support this work that
to do together.
Thank you.
I didn't write anything down, but you guys are great.
I did write something down.
Right.
As well. So I spent a good part of, especially yesterday and today, studying data, which I'm apt to do on something like this. So I've got a few things to say here that some are exactly the same as stuff that's been said, but some of it hasn't been said. So I'm going to share it with you and bear with me for 5 or 6 minutes. I think all of it. Sorry. Well, that was the unimportant part anyway, I guess. So
He just said he was going to talk. That's what he said.
yeah, that's basically what I spent 5 minutes saying. Okay, so I think all of us sincerely wish we weren't having a levy discussion tonight. This is no fun for anybody. And I think honestly, everyone in some ways being touched by inflation and the worry about future economic stability. This is the real thing. Some of our neighbors are impacted much more than others, and the current economic challenges are ever the more meaningful to those families. So no one takes this issue lightly or believes in any way it's an easy decision. I had hoped by the time we would be having this discussion, those hopes were way back when, much healing would have happened from the 2019-2020 era. I've seen substantive changes on many levels to our school system, reflecting efforts towards improved transparency, fiscal discipline, and an unwavering focus on giving our kids the best start we can give them. And I've been in the middle of this for a couple of years or so, so I think I have some sense of what I'm talking to you all about. As a business person, this is who I am. As a business person, I want to understand where the money comes from, where it goes, how effectively managed the district is, and the impact all of it is having. So the first issue is revenue sources, and for the most part, our revenue is driven by this Ohio State model that generates a lot of controversy, but frankly, it is what it is, and we have to work with it. We don't get to change this in the middle of a cycle, and we don't get to change it probably over the course of 10 years the way that the state government works. Within that, generally speaking, for almost the last 50 years, I mean, think about it, 50 years now, property taxes from a school levy don't change as the market value of a home increases. And at the end of the day, that's the fundamental reason that levies come up from time to time. That's what it's all about. That's what drives it. If we had this so-called inflationary increase, this is probably not something that we would be doing except for buildings or special programs or things of that nature that would come around far less frequently. The district's primary source of revenue is fixed year to year, while people costs making up the supermajority of expenses continue to rise. There is no cost of living adjustment nor increases in income that parallel what we think of in household finance. This is a different world. After tight fiscal management, which is just mandatory, and I think we've seen a lot of that in the last couple of years, the levy is the only way to address the magnitude of the eventual impact cost inflation has within the schools. Sure, there's a ton of things that still can be done to save money or to generate money, but when you put the potential of those kinds of things up against the inflationary impact on a $50 million business, you don't have much of a chance of getting it done that way. So you're back to talking about a levy. The last one of which we've talked about was 8 years ago, and it followed 3 previous levies that were only 3 or 4 years apart. So we're 8. The prior 3 levies were 3 or 4 years apart. The current 4.9 mil request falls in line with the average of the 5 previous levies going back to 1996. That was the average of that is actually about 5.0. So a little bit less. So in a sense, this is a request that has shown some very good fiscal discipline of living within the district's fixed means for an unusually long period of time. And part of what I've been doing the last 2 days is looking at the 600 districts across the state and understanding how we fit in this big system of 600 districts, about 1.5 million kids in this system. These districts receive state and federal funding plus revenue from business property taxes that help to offset the burden of the total cost of schools on local homeowners. It's a package of all of these things. But in Loveland's case, we pay property taxes that rank, believe it or not, in the top 15% of districts. That's a fact. And the resulting revenue per student ranks in the top 20% of districts. That sounds like we're collecting a ton of money and we're spending it like crazy, doesn't it? Well, not quite. It's so high because state and federal revenue in our case is so small versus other districts. And the fact that the district's average income rank, and we never like to hear this, but again, it is a fact, that we rank in the top 10% of districts across the state is reflected in the low allocation of federal and state monies to us. So because of who we are, we're left by higher level authorities to basically bear the burden of funding this school system. Add on to this, our business property taxes also rank in the lowest 10% of districts. Is what it is. Meaning that homeowners bear almost all of the property tax burden. That's driven by the fact, though, that we live in a community, if you stop to think about it, that is far more homes and parks than offices and industrial plants. The folks that have higher business, the communities that have higher business property tax income don't look like Loveland looks. In itself, not a bad thing, but this is part of the price that we pay for having the community that looks like the community that we all chose to live in. Next issue is where the money goes. How much goes to areas we think of as what I call overhead, or you might call it not directly to student expenditures. Administration expense per student, it turns out, administration expense per student is in the lower half, well into the lower half of districts. And the ratio of students to administrators, so the number of administrators versus the number of students that we have in the district. So do we have a lot of administrators? Do we not have a lot of administrators? The ratio of students to administrators is in the highest 15% of districts, which means that administrative-wise, we are staffed very low for the number of students that we serve. These are all the kinds of things you want to see in this type of data. And the percentage of expenditures that are directly focused on students is in the top 2/3 of districts. So we're spending the money that we get in the right places. In the end, the total expenditure, I mentioned this earlier, the total expenditure per student is only roughly at the midpoint of all districts. We've also talked a bit about this. We've seen drops in enrollment for several years. Kind of fascinating when you tear it apart. I've looked at the class of 23 and 24 and 25 and out and where they started and how changes are occurring within the student population. It's really very fascinating. The class of 23, for example, I think is within one head count of when they were in first grade. So some have come, some have gone, but it turns out to be pretty much exactly the same. And that's true for a number of classes yet to come, but not all classes yet to come. So there are reductions that are happening out there. And we don't really understand why it's happening. Some of it is likely COVID and some seems to be population oriented. But in any event, the fiscally responsible approach is to keep the district, as I used this term earlier, right-sized to its target student population. And from what I can see so far, we've reduced staff in the last several years commensurately and have a policy to ensure that it's tightly controlled going forward. What do we get for this? One measure is the standardized test rankings. We talked about this before. The performance index has been a little hard to come by in the last couple of years because of COVID and these things. But if you look at 19, the last year that's been published so far, the district ranked in the top 10%. That's a balanced measurement of student performance. So we're spending about the average that any district in the state spends, and we're getting students coming through that are achieving in the top 10%. So there seems to be some pretty good balance there. I won't go through in any detail what we're getting for the levy ask. We've been through this a number of times now. The busing, the staffing, the contingency. We've had a lot of discussion about earmarking those funds and controlling them, which I think is the appropriate thing to do. The administration has indicated the need for a levy at this time as their projections show spending the cash balance that we have right now. And everybody should understand, there's a $14 million number that's bandied around an awful lot out there. That's a point in time number. Just like your household checking account looks pretty healthy the day you get paid and not so healthy the day you pay your mortgage. This $14 million so-called fund operates in very much the same way because the district effectively gets paid just twice a year. So it goes up, and I guarantee you it goes down. And the rate that it goes down by is about $5 million per month. So 14 doesn't last a very long time, but fortunately, midway through the year, another shot of property taxes are paid by homeowners and are funneled through the county to our bank account, and we get to live off of that for a period of time going forward. But eventually you get into a situation, and we're there now, where we are spending more than we are taking in, and that's a case that we call deficit spending. The longer that goes on means that the cash balance is further dissipated and the size of the problem grows. So the board, and I think it's important to understand this, the board cannot approve a tax increase. That's not within our authority. We could shut it down. We could stop the public debate about it, or we can vote to allow it to proceed. We can only approve asking voters to make the final decision. And in the coming months, I think we all need to hear more completely the underlying issues, the impacts of going now versus waiting. But I think in the end, we owe the community the opportunity to make the judgment on this. I'm of a mind to say the community has a right to hear this and to vote on it. And what happens in November happens in November. The one thing, and we get a lot of emails, and some of the emails have, very, sometimes some rough tones to them. Sometimes language that how could you ever think of doing something like this? Well, I'm trying to tell you that a lot of thought goes into doing something like this. A lot of sensitivity goes into doing something like this. And our goal is not to fracture the community or to create a new era of mistrust out there. I think that happens or it doesn't happen based on the discussions that we have over the next several months, the way we talk to each other, the way we give each other a chance to voice their opinion, their perspective, and ultimately render their decision in November. So I would urge the community to do this calmly, to have the debate, to ask the questions, ask the hard questions. Be critical if you need to be critical, if you think that opportunities have been missed, but do it with respect so we can, get through this and be neighbors again come the second week or so of November. Thank you.
I also didn't write anything down. But Eric says, go ahead. I'm obviously the person who's been sitting in front of community members for more than 30 years now. And I totally agree with Mr. Doherty that there's never been a time when I have voted or when I've seen a Board of Education that I've been a part of vote to put a levy on the ballot and think that it was a fun thing to do. It is not something that has ever been done lightly. It is not something that is done out of any sense of, even a sense of duty. This is what we have to do and you just have to accept it. It's always been quite clear that a Board of Education has to put a levy on the ballot asking the taxpayers to agree to that levy or disagree with that levy. Again, I've never been a part of a board that thought, hey, let's get some more money. It's always been a sense of, let's figure out how to make this district work for the kids who go to school here. But it has always been the ability of the public to speak. It was very shocking to me when I came to Ohio from a different state, and I was told that the way the school district makes its budget balance is if it needs more money, it has to ask the voters for more money. State that I was in, school districts created a budget, said this is what we need to educate this many students. It went to the State Department of Education. They agreed or disagreed, came back to the district if they disagreed, and they had to rework their budget. And then the taxes were levied based on that. I'm not saying that's the right way to do it. Certainly taxpayers would feel that the right way to do it, if we're going to levy more taxes, you should have the right to say you're going to pay more taxes. It is one of the few things in this world where you get to say, I want to pay more taxes, or I don't want to pay more taxes. When you go to the store, you don't get to say, I want to pay this much for this thing. Now, sometimes you have to make a decision. Well, I'm not going to buy it at all if it costs more, or I have to buy something that costs less, but you don't get to tell Kroger how much to charge for the milk that you're buying in the store, the way you do have the opportunity, voters do have the opportunity to say, this is what I want to pay for taxes. But I will tell you that in 30 some years, I have never been a part of a board that did not consider what they were asking the taxpayers to vote on. I have been a part of boards who have lobbied for changes in state funding. I've been an individual on 2 different task force trying to figure out how the state can better work out its education budget. The only thing I would say to that is, I spent a lot of time, particularly on one of those efforts, and it was going to be an individual, not a performance-based budget, but it was going to be based on how much it costs to teach a student this thing and how much it costs to put a desk in this classroom. I will simply say that even when I was working on that, it was for the state to decide how much an education would cost. And that money that comes from the state comes out of our taxpayer pockets as well. We don't simply say to the state, change the way you fund schools and find some money somewhere. If they change the way they fund schools, they're going to find the money from the taxpayer pockets. They simply have to. So all of this has gone into everything that we have talked about this evening, that we have always talked about when considering levies. I will say to you that I was not able to be at the June 16th meeting when the first vote was taken on this. I would have voted to ask the county auditor to certify how much this levy would cost. And I would choose to vote on placing this on the ballot this evening because I believe that this is a strong board that has asked a lot of the right questions. And this is a very strong superintendent and treasurer who know what they're talking about and have given us information in order to make the decision to place this issue on the ballot.
I'd love to leave that in your hands. There's no reason for me to add anything else to what everybody else has already said. I think I would only go back to, I don't want to see trauma in our community again. We as a board have done, we as an administration have done a lot of due diligence to get to this point. If there's concerns that we haven't done a good job, if there's something that appears to have gone awry, if there's a question about money or finances, bring it to us. We should be able to answer it. And if we can't, that tells you something. So don't draw battle lines. Don't yes, no, good, bad. This is the way that schools are funded in Ohio, and we can't fix that now.
Anything else? Are we ready to call the question?
We are. I have been asked by at least one board member to memorialize these comments as a narrative And so I'm asking if that would be the wish of the board to provide all of the comments that you made. And if you could provide those with, I can obviously listen to the recording, but to memorialize those in this resolution as presented.
Yes, it would be the age-old question that we've had about memorializing things in the minutes. It's a question of, we have had statements before where the statement is actually printed. It's a little more difficult to memorialize things that were said extemporaneously. And what we have been doing in the recent past is making note of the timestamp so that people can listen to the recording. And presumably this evening, we have not one, but two recordings that could be listened to. But I'm fine with trying to add some.
I think we have 3 documents too, that we can simply attach.
Mhm.
It is what it is.
Yeah, happy to share that.
All right.
Very good.
All right, then, Mr. Giuffre, can we vote on this?
Reverend Eiler,
Yes.
Dr. Swetchna,
Yes.
Mr. Doherty,
Yes.
Dr. Lorenz,
Yes,
and Mrs. Washburn.
Yes.
motion carried. The full wording of the resolution is included in board docs so that you can see, anyone that board docs can see. As we have mentioned, we are talking about a 4.9 mil per year levy.
I'll be filing that on Thursday because the Board of Election is closed after an election. So they're closed tomorrow. So I'll be
Yes.
down there on Thursday morning.
All right, very good. Thank you. All right, I can't get to the right place on here. Okay, the next item that comes up to the board is transfer of territory from the Little District. I will move to approve to accept transfer of territory from Little Miami Local School District. Is there a second? Mr. Doherty seconded. Questions about this? I know Mr. Giuffre sent out some information letting us know that this was going to come before the board. We have not had a chance to discuss this, I don't believe, before. This is fairly straightforward. If you are not familiar with the notion, I don't think I've ever accepted a transfer of territory.
We have
Um,
discussed it previously, right? You brought it, at least informationally, you said this was coming.
I sent the documentation out 2 months ago, and then at the last board meeting, I believe I said that I would prefer that we had all 5 board members in attendance to be able to accept or deny
Right.
the transfer.
Thank you. Yes. And so I am saying that I've never accepted a transfer of territory. The way that it works, I have had requests for transfer of territory as a member of a board. We have had requests for people to transfer their territory into Loveland. Loveland's answer has always been that if the giving school district approves it, then the board would consider accepting the transfer. The way it does work, though, is a transfer is requested and that it does get approved at the state level. A petition is approved by the state level, so it can't come to us before it's approved there. And this has gone through that process.
And back in the 90s, the Brisbane property in the Loveland or Little Miami School District, I believe it came to the board and asked, and Little Miami said no. This is the first time I've ever seen a school district say no and the Department of Education say yes. But what's unique and different about this, I believe, is that these homeowners have properties that straddle. So they've got more than one parcel, and the parcels straddle between Loveland and Little Miami. And I think that's why ODE was allowing it to occur. And so they're closer to our buildings and properties than they are to Little Miami properties as a result.
A fun fact that you may not be aware of is in cases where there are properties that do straddle boundaries, sometimes the rule that I had always heard that was followed was
Bedroom?
where the child's bedroom was, that's what district it was in. So I guess you could move your child to a different bedroom and then you would move to a different. I don't know.
Why
if
is your
that's-
child in the
that-
master
that
bedroom?
That might be an urban myth. I don't know, but that's what I had heard. We have a couple of pieces of property that were decided. They're kind of on the edge of neighboring school districts. And at least one that I know of that straddles, but it was decided on some basis that most of the house was in Loveland and that we didn't have to do a transfer on that. That was simply how it was.
And I know the board's not asking, but your treasurer would recommend this highly.
And I think that the reason you can see that the state board took its action in 2019, I think it simply did not come to us before now. So we're going to take care of that. Or we can take care of that. We have the opportunity to take care of that. Any questions?
Yeah, just to make sure we all understand this, there's taxing revenue that comes with this, along with responsibility for the education of the children in those households, hand in hand.
And Rob, let me just ask one more question. This happened in 2019 and going to the tax implication of it. Have these children been in Loveland schools since 2019?
They've not. My understanding is they have been in Children's Meeting House. No idea what the intent going forward would be for the children. But if I were, and then this, I guess, is this, the reasonable person rule, is if I were the property owner, I'd be making the same request so that I could have all my property.
Well, and then the second question is just out of curiosity, why did something that happened 3.5 years ago come to us now?
Because I wasn't here.
Okay, good answer. Yes.
Is that a reasonable answer?
Okay, any other questions? Mr. Giuffre, can we vote on that?
Dr. Lorenz.
Yes.
Mr. Doherty.
Yes.
Reverend Eiler.
Yes.
Dr. Schwetzenow.
Yes.
And Mrs. Washburn.
Motion carried. We then move into the treasurer's resolutions, and we have the June 2022 financial reports. And so a motion here would be that we accept those reports. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Mr. Doherty moved. For a second. And Mrs. Warren seconded. Questions? The financial reports are on board docs as usual, and those were available for board review and are available for the public to see. And so the board is simply accepting that information. Questions? All right, I see that we lost Dr. Swetch now for a moment.
Duly noted.
Want to wait to vote, or you want to call the question?
We're fine.
Call the question.
All right, question has been called. Mr. Giuffre, can we vote?
Mr. Doherty.
Yes.
Ms. Washburn.
Yes.
Reverend Eiler.
Yes.
Dr. Lorenz.
Yes. Motion carried. All right, then we move into Director of Human Resources items. And the first one is the superintendent recommends the board approve the modification of the Loveland City School District exempt employee handbook. Can we have a motion on that? And then we'll have to. Mrs. Washburn moved. Is there a second?
Second.
Reverend Eilert seconded. I believe that Mr. Collier has additional information to give us. Some of that information has been alluded to already, but we're going to get the full explanation here.
Yes, some of this I mentioned earlier. We have tonight, you will see that we have a resignation of our person who is in the EMIS position that currently right now is an administrative position. So it gave us the opportunity, just like when there's ever a time when a position is open, for us to make sure that how we're going to replace that person and what that position looks like, making sure that we're doing the right things. As I mentioned earlier, I reached out to area schools, other human resources directors in the area. I have heard back from 14 different folks, so it's a wide variety of school districts. And you can see that some of the information I collected is whether the position is administrative or exempt. The majority of them have it as an exempt position. I also asked how many days are in the contract. You can see the average came out to be 248, but in essence, they're all about the same. Whether you're talking about an EMIS person being in the exempt or an administrative, it's roughly about the same number of days. And then starting pay, the entry level pay that they have at that district for that position, what the ending pay is, and then what they are actually paying their person in that role. I averaged some of those for you guys to see. The average entry level pay for that position came a little over $70,000. The average max level pay came in a little over $96,000. And the actual pay average is in the $80,000 range. So we took that information and we saw this as an opportunity for us to make a change for this to not be an administrative role, but to be an exempt role. Our exempt scale that we currently have, in essence, it wasn't matching the information that we had. So we are proposing a separate scale in the exempt handbook that is just for this particular position. And we are recommending that the entry level pay be basically around the $70,000 range, and that our max level pay is below the average, roughly $6,000 worth. So that information is there for you guys to see. There are a couple of very small other changes to the handbook that you will see, none of which are really notable other than this EMIS change that you've got in front of you. Questions for me?
The 252-day schedule, is that comparable with other administrative office days?
Yeah, the average for the EMIS role was 248 from those 14. Our other exempt positions, they're on a 252. So when the average was 252, everybody else in the exempt handbook, their average was 248. Everybody else in our exempt handbook was 252. So I thought that it would be, with continuity, we would just keep the 252.
Any other questions, comments? All right, so this person, a new person will start in this position August 1st? Is that correct?
The resignation you'll see in the next piece that you guys will go, that you guys will take a look at, that the resignation is at the end of August.
End of August.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
31st of August.
Got it. No other questions? All right, can we vote on that, Mr. Dupre?
Mrs. Washburn,
Yes.
Reverend Eiler,
Yes.
Mr. Doherty,
Yes.
Dr. Lorenz,
Yes,
Dr. Schwestino.
Yes.
motion carried. And then I believe the final item on our agenda this evening is our human resource item, employment resignations for certified classified homebound substitute and supplemental personnel for the 2022-2023 school year. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Reverend Eilert moved, Mrs. Washburn seconded, and I will point out to board members, it looks like there are two highlighted pieces. So if you looked at these agenda items previous to the meeting, you will note that there were two additional items added for
Yes.
this evening.
And those are highlighted in yellow, and they're section A, 16 and 17.
Any questions or discussion on that? Feels like a lot of resignations for this time of year.
I know, it's just because it's a part of the summertime, and if people are starting other positions, making changes. I do want to point out that two of the resignations are bus driver positions. We had talked about that earlier. A number of them are also just a leave of absence positions, not necessarily resignations. We have been extremely busy and working hard in the HR office this summer, making sure that we're adequately staffed for this next school year. We do have a couple of remaining positions that we're looking for folks. The majority of those are things because of resignations or leave of absences that we were unaware of until, later in the summer. And we're working on those as we speak. And then the rest of the pieces that are here on the report are more of a standard variety, and I would be glad to answer any questions you guys might have.
Any questions or comments?
Looks like the bulk of the resignations are custodial staff, food service,
Now there's some aides and
aides and monitors.
Correct. So, which is traditionally been the case for us with, we typically have less resignations in the certified area and the teaching area, but we sometimes see our biggest area would be with our classified staff. And that would be what's represented here with bus drivers, aides, custodians, kitchen staff, that type of thing.
I see we're adding a few one-year replacement teachers. This may be an unfair question. Do you know how many new folks new to the district we have. They're not necessarily, in other words, they could be a replacement for a resignation. They could be a one-year resignation, a one-year replacement. Do you know how many new folks we have coming to the district?
Yes, I believe the number is 33 right now, 17 of which are for certified positions. But we still have a couple that we are trying to shore up.
And are you hoping to be able to invite them to a meeting to put
Yes.
faces to names for the
Yes.
board? And can we
After
have
the-
cookies?
Yes. Whether we have cookies or not, I don't know. We'll leave that up
Getting
to you
hungry.
guys.
I tell you.
But yes,
We often
Yes.
have cookies for those events. So,
Burgers.
the new staff do get invited to, once the school year has begun, to that board meeting. That's a tradition that we have had. We will be doing that again this year. And you guys will get a list and the invites go out. And typically we have about half of them show up. They have busy lives, starting a new job and whatever but it is nice to kind of formally recognize them. For those of you who have been at our opening day ceremonies, we also recognize our current staff with years of experience and recognition, but also our new staff are recognized.
do we have that day on our calendar?
It is August 12th and it begins at 8 a.m. at the high school auditorium. It's Friday.
I just thought maybe we'd ask board members who might be able to come. Mrs. Washburn, have you started school then?
We don't talk about that.
Okay. And unfortunately, I will be out of town for a memorial service,
Okay.
so I won't be there. Other board members able to be there?
August 12th,
August 12th.
I can be there.
8 a.m. high school auditorium.
They're not having cookies, so Kevin won't come.
There are not refreshments.
There last year.
He was
He
there.
was there last year, yes. And I apologize. I do very much enjoy being able to meet new folks there and being able to recognize folks. So I
It's-
apologize. I
It's
can't.
kind of a neat tradition that we have. There's a lot of positive energy, coming into a new school year. I'm hoping that it being the first time that you were there last year, Mr. Doherty, that you thought that it was a really neat event that we put on.
I was very impressed by it, actually.
Yeah. Thank you.
All right. Anything of a substantive nature for this resolution? Any questions? All right. Then, Mr. Giuffre, can we vote on that?
Reverend Eiler,
Yes.
Mrs. Washburn,
Yes.
Mr. Doherty,
Yes.
Dr. Lorenz,
Yes.
Dr. Schwetzner.
Yes.
Motion carried.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Carlier. I don't see anything else on the agenda except a motion to adjourn. Do we have a
So
motion
moved.
to adjourn? Okay, I hear Dr. Swetchner and
I miss Michelle.
Mrs. Washburn.
I was thinking of her.
And so I will ask everyone to say aye if they are in agreement with adjourning.
Aye.
And I will say the meeting is adjourned at 8:33.